Councillors, thank you for taking your seats, everyone, and to our other committee members. Welcome this morning to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, the 8th of November 2018. This is our last committee meeting for the year. Yes, so no mai, haere mai, welcome to everyone. And of course we are live streaming, so to those watching from afar, nice to have you with us this morning too. Our mobile phones, please, just put them off the table if you don't mind, and we'll take a break from time to time so that we can check and clear our messages if necessary. Thank you. So I'm going to move straight into our agenda. We do have one apology this morning from Councillor Kent. Any other apologies, please? Thank you. It's been moved by, thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Donaldson and seconded by Mr. Berryman Camp. Thank you. That apology be accepted. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. Any declarations of interest this morning, please? Thank you. Urgent items not on the agenda. Carl, thank you. Confirmation of our minutes, which are on page 8. If you're, thank you. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 11th of October 2018 be confirmed as true and correct. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any? Oh, I'll put that motion. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary. Thank you. I should have put the any corrections or changes to the minutes. Thank you, just as well. Thank you. Staff reports. Recommendation 1, which is on page 13. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, Child Equity Program. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Gould. I'll put that motion to receive the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Morena Korua. Thank you, JP. You're going to be overviewing the report.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors and board representatives, just as a brief introduction, you'll recall it was some time ago now that a number of the staff went down to Hutt City, and we looked at a program being undertaken by Hutt City to improve the access to services and opportunities provided to their children in schools, and in a particular area of the Hutt City boundary area. And really for us it was quite an important visit, because for us it also highlighted again some of the issues that we saw being raised when we did the refresh of Vision 2030, and we talked about easy living and an easy place to live, and a place for everyone. And some of the feedback that we got back quite strongly during some of that consultation was yes for some, but for others it's not. And so for us to be true to the vision, which is sitting up there, that this is a place for everyone, we felt it was important to reflect on what we'd seen in the Hutt City and bring back some of those ideas to be talked about in our community. We didn't want to just come back and talk specifically about what the Hutt did, and so I'm being particularly vague about the specifics of their program. Jill's going to take us through a presentation, but for us it's really important to make sure that what we talk about here meets the needs of our community and is discussed and developed with our community. So I'll just hand over to Jill just to lead you through this presentation.
Thank you, and good morning, Jill.
Morena. Kia ora koutou, ko Jill Campbell Takuinua. I'm a strategy advisor within our strategy team. Our presentation is going to update on the proposed council-facilitated program to address inequities for our local children and focus on ensuring that Rotorua is in fact a place for everyone. We're seeking your approval to progress this work and partner with our school communities to develop the initial program. I'd also like to acknowledge this morning that we have representatives from Sunset Primary School, So here today with us we have Eden Chapman, who will become the new principal of the school in the new year, Niels Rasmussen, and Richard Totten. So we have the current principal and board chair.
Oh, can I just extend a welcome to you? Thank you to our meeting this morning. Thank you. Nice to have you with us. Thank you.
So at this point, we're very much in the starting stages of the project. We're working with partners to shape up what this will look like in a co-designed space. The concept of child equity aligns strongly with Council's people portfolio and the focus around Rotorua being an inclusive community. It also aligns with the sustainable living strategy focus on community resilience, health and well-being, and using a child and fauna-centered approach to remove barriers to participation. We're wanting to address inequities and embedding this into Council's community funding policy. So if you remember, making a difference was actually a strong focus of the funding application process this year around partnership agreements and community grants. Our program will include co-design with schools to improve access for children in need to Council facilities and services, sports and recreation opportunities, and extracurricular activities, and facilitating and providing opportunities for community and private partnership within making this happen. So the reason we have Sunset Primary School here with us this morning is that we're proposing that they become the inaugural partner, and we work with them to develop the program. We've worked with Fordlands, and when I say we, our area, and Council has worked with Fordlands for a number of years, and especially with the Fordlands Community Association, I myself have been involved in the youth space, free parking, and some of the other rangatahi programs that we have in that space. Just a reflection of that community, and some things to think about also is the fact that Fordlands has a deprivation level of 10. And that's something that needs to be changed and looked at, okay? So I'm going to start off with statistics, and these are statistics that you may not be aware of. We want Rotorua to be a great place to grow up, but this is not the case for many of our tamariki. 41% of Rotorua's 0 to 9-year-olds are living in areas with a deprivation rating of 9 to 10. A deprivation rating of 1 is good. Deprivation rating of 10, you can't get worse. So our children that are living in these communities, they're living in real material hardship, and many of these children are going without basic needs. 3 out of 5 tamariki living in poverty will stay there for life. The majority of these children are Maori, and there are barriers for them accessing services and activities. There are also barriers within our own services that we need to reflect on. So the challenge is tātou, we together. What are we as a community doing about this? Within the community and community conversations that we've heard over the past 2 years, there are growing concerns around poverty. And Te Tato o Te Arawa, their submission on Council's 2030 vision refresh, they quoted that easy living, strength identified for many, was not universal, and that many struggled with accommodation and living costs. Feedback from Council's 2018 Huia Iwi and wider consultation included the overarching themes of community aspirations to address poverty and inequities. And in 2016, 100 local people attended the Tackling Poverty workshop here, and the impact of poverty on our young people was their main concern raised. I've included free parking around community conversations. So I'm sure you're all aware that we run free sport and recreation activities in Kotu, Fordlands, Western Heights, Eastside. And 3 years ago, we were running evaluation with this program, and the children talk to us with their feet. So that program was funded and run for rangatahi age 12 and up, but half of the participants were between 5 and 11. So here we are running and focusing our programs on rangatahi, but the children are coming. And so we need to change that. We need to mold our services so that we're encompassing whānau instead of it just being rangatahi alone. They have siblings, they have to bring them. And so just looking at the sheer amount of children that we're turning up to that, we need to look at that because these are the communities we're talking about. Rotorua working together, engaging Rotorua rangatahi in positive pathways. That's around looking at children and young people not engaged in education, training, and employment, and ensuring that they're going to school and creating the pathways for them to work with them. So nationally and internationally, there's a lot of support and evidence showing us that child poverty is a real issue, and that local government is able to get involved here. So council is contributing to this through our partnership agreements and community grants. So when we're talking about child poverty and not meeting the basic needs, what is happening around this space? We are funding Kids Can, we're funding Ka Pai Kai. There are a variety of other organizations that are working around the basic needs for children, and a lot of that is through school. So Fonterra, for example, is providing milk. Kids Can is providing raincoats, shoes, food, in some cases knit treatment, and a variety of other support services. So a range of national and international evidence supports the need for children to be able to participate in leisure, play, sport, cultural, and artistic activities as an approach toward addressing some of the impacts on poverty. And what we're talking about here is giving the opportunity to experience something different. When you are living in poverty, you're not participating in those activities. And when you're not participating in those activities, you're isolated. So you only know what you know. You're living in isolation from good, positive role models, coaches, opportunities, and experiences that are going to lift you out of poverty. So the Office of the Children's Commissioner have a plethora of research supporting this. The United Nations General Assembly, again, that supports the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which defines universal principles and standards for the status and treatment of children, but also looks at the affirmation of the children's right to play. Sport New Zealand has a big focus on this as well. And we also have heard from Ministry of Education, the police, and some of our local partners saying that, yeah, there's a gap here. And a lot of the gaps that we're talking about there's a lot of research supporting early childhood education initiatives, the first 1,000 days work, and there is support around rangatahi pathways around education, training, employment, but we're missing that bridge by not including children. So as JP mentioned, earlier in the year, we had a look at what Hutt City was doing in this space as a local government authority and looking at a community as well that has similar communities of deprivation as we do. They also challenged themselves to say, what are we doing about this? So the communities that they're looking at were Nainai, Taita, Stokes Valley, and Pāmere, areas where children didn't have access to transport, technology, sports, and things that make a difference in your life. So they challenged themselves to change their status quo as local government and saw gaps where they could make a difference for their most vulnerable rangatahi. So based around the Walter Nash Center, which opened in 2015, Transformation Taita is focused on empowering Tamariki for a brighter future while building a stronger community. And their project is around taking full advantage of the range of council facilities. So free access to council swimming pools for participating children, They provide free internet, book borrowing, and printing at their libraries in these communities. They also reviewed their fine policy. They looked at free transport for educational trips to the Wellington region. They also looked at opportunity for children and their whānau to participate in games that might be happening. So a reflection on our own council is we provide tickets to, for example, Steamers games, but we provide tickets to the child. That child is part of a whānau. So if we give one ticket to a whānau who can't afford to go, and the rest of their siblings can't go and their parents can't go, well, the reality is that children's probably not going to that game. And so let's change that. It's not necessarily massive change. It's just about doing things and looking at how we deliver differently. They were able to get corporate and private partnership built into the program. And so they have a partnership with KPMG, who provides volunteers in schools. They provide funding to their program, but they also provide an opportunity for children to go into their offices and have a look at what it's like to go to KPMG for a day, see what an accountant does, see what an administrator does, things that potentially our council could be doing or some of our partners could be doing as well. So again, it's about thinking differently, not necessarily about funding itself. So our proposed Tamariki program is challenging, or having a look at what our challenges are. So that our most vulnerable Tamariki are not accessing extracurricular activities, and this impacts on education, employment, social, and well-being outcomes. We need to be looking at opportunities that enable hope, inspiration, aspiration, connection, inclusion, an experience to participate. So when you're not participating, as mentioned, when you're not participating in these activities, then again, you're sitting that much more in isolation, and we want to change that. So our response is around developing a program that provides equitable participation, and that would start with our own council services. So having a look at the library, the aquatic center. Currently, we have our Making a Difference swim program that provides four free swim classes for our decile 1 to 4 schools. But the issue is that for some of our schools, they don't have the volunteers to take the children to the pool. So we're providing free entry and free swim class, but some schools can't access it because they can't take the child from the school into the aquatic center. They don't have the volunteers. We're looking to extend our partners and include them into the school opportunity. So looking at volunteers, funding goods in kind, and selecting the communities with high deprivation that are willing to work with us. And so we've had this conversation with Sunset Primary. They're very keen to get involved. And quite frankly, we do have a number of communities that are just as deserving, but we need to start somewhere. And we wanted to start with a school that one had the need, but two, we have a history of working with, and three have put their hand up to say, yes, we're keen, we're willing to work together. So we want to challenge ourselves and look at the opportunity for our children to get to the Blue Lake. We want our children to ride bikes. We want them to participate in school holiday programs. Our most vulnerable children are not necessarily doing these things. We want to provide and take away barriers for participating in marae programming, ensuring that they have an opportunity to visit a marae, go to the beach, touch the snow, and do things that some of our other children take for granted. So the outcomes of a program like this are not, we're not going to find out the outcomes the next day. Tamariki are able to participate in extracurricular activities, but it may not be until they're 15 or 16 years old that they realize, actually, that coach made a big difference in my life, and they really gave me aspiration to finish school and go on to do post-secondary education. So evaluation with a program like this is actually quite important. Again, the concept of child equity aligns strongly with our people portfolio and focuses on Rotorua being inclusive and aligns with the sustainable living strategy. around community resilience, health and well-being, using a child and whānau-centered approach, and removing barriers to participation. We want to achieve and ensure that our empowering our tamariki for a brighter future with focus on access to extracurricular activities and experiences, investing and enabling participation for tamariki with a focus on schools, communities, and areas where there is the greatest need. And just a reminder, as you're all aware, that local government is also setting targets for reducing child poverty and looking to reintroduce the 4 well-being statements. So this is a really good opportunity to put our money where our mouth is. So a timeline, again, if we're able to gain council approval, we'll look to progress and co-design the program with Sunset Primary School. And look to work with them from now until February to co-design a program. So this is not about us influencing. This is about us sitting together with Sunset Primary School and the Fordlands community to tell us about what their needs are and to be able to address some of their barriers to participation and engage some of our partners to ensure that their children in tamariki are participating. We would use the school year, so from February to December 2019, to deliver the program. And again, including evaluation throughout so that we're learning as we go and changing and molding the program to ensure that we're making an impact and that we can evaluate our impact. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that going? Thank you very much, Jill, for that presentation. And there will be a number of questions. I'd just like to say that I'm very pleased that this paper has come to us today. You'll be aware that the Prime Minister herself has said that she will tackle reduction in child poverty in this country. And so that's a commitment that she made. And I think the council that you've just presented to us this morning is an opportunity for us to look to see what we can do. There is no doubt that we are an unequal society, and you know, the brutal truth that you mentioned there, 41% of our children from 0 to 9 years of age live in deprivation. So you know, we no child should be left behind. So I think this is very timely. So I just want to just say that I'm pleased that this has come. And for a lot of people, they have no understanding of what deprivation, people who live in deprivation, what that's like. They think, you know, it's begging in the streets and sitting in the gutters. Deprivation is about lack of, and that's exactly what you've highlighted, and the inability to participate. But I'm going to take the questions now, and I can see hands going up left, right and centre. Councillor Gould, then your worship, and I'll take the others as they come along. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move number 2. But I've got a number of questions. When you mention Kids Can and the milk program through Frontiera, it's normally to low decile schools. And when you mention Learn to Swim on one of your slides, is that going to be free access for all the students at that particular school or all students at all Rotorua primary schools? And you also mentioned the Lakes District Health Board. Would that involve using the Department of Health? Because quite often you can get funding from the department, from the government through that particular funding. And with the Lakes District Health Board, do you also involve the mental health unit of that particular board? And will other schools be able to take part in the program when more funding becomes available? And I note that free parking, which you mentioned in Western Heights, is very successful, so that's a program you probably want to work with the Western Heights group to work out how to make it successful.
Councillor Gould, thank you for all those questions. There were a lot of questions that you posed, but I'd like you, Jill, really just to focus on the ones that pertain to the program that you're going to be developing. Thank you.
Sure. So with regards to the Making a Difference swim program at the Rotorua Aquatic Centre, that's already taking place, and that is for decile 1 to 4 schools across the district. So it's not just one school participating, it's open and available to all of our lower decile schools to ensure that the children who need it most have an opportunity to learn how to swim. Lake CHB and Ministry of Health, again, it's around sitting at the table together with the school and identifying what their needs are, and from there we'll start to engage the other partners. We have had initial conversations with them. A number of those agencies have said we're keen to participate, but again, we'll let the school and the community guide that conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the other questions. Your Worship? Thank you.
Yes, just as the Chair said, thank you for bringing this paper. I think we've had a focus this term on hard infrastructure. Now it feels like we're bringing back the people into the centre, but we did do something for the little ones with the Children's Hub in Te Akamori. My question here is, because instantly, I know you talk about co-design that you'll bring back to us, but there are many other programs, not just other agencies, that are of great value if we could get them linked in as well. Is that part of the strategy, Jill? I'm just thinking of Roots of Empathy, for example, and it may be the same as swimming, that they can't get the volunteers. So the co-design is going to be quite a challenge to get the wider community engaged in the focus on helping Sunset as a great start.
Thank you.
So the co-design,
Yeah.
how do we get that bit in?
Yeah. So we had a hui 2 weeks ago and invited a range of organizations and services around the table. We've had conversations with the Graham Dingle Foundation, for example. And so there are, the Roots of Empathy are, well, I'm not sure if they're in there this year, but they have worked in partnership with Sunset Primary. So absolutely, yes, that's what it's about. It's not necessarily just about council services. It's about everybody in the community pitching in and doing their very best for these tamariki.
Thank you.
Jill, can I just follow on from Her Worship and the co-design? Co-design really is what the community wants. Yes. It's what the school community, it's what the family wants. Often we will see providers of services rock up and say, have I got a deal for you? And it is not necessarily what fits with the wishes of the community. And I will have to say, I was in Auckland yesterday looking at a whole raft of programs that actually were co-designed by the community, because what was currently being provided was not their wish, didn't matter to their wishes. So I think the co-design aspect of here with the community, with the school community and with the families, I think could go a long way to being very successful with the program. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I have a question out here, but just before I do that, thank you, Jill, for your good report, Natty, and thank you for helping in areas like Western Heights, Kotu and Fordlands for the funding you were able to get us for the playgrounds there. I do remember that report. My question centres around, we have built an award-winning Te Akamori project, and it's wonderful there. My question is, what are some of the things we can do more there? And while you're thinking about that question, I think you've chosen the right school to start with, and school is an important part for our young people to continue through on. But yeah, it is new, and you said you're going to collaborate with some of the things we have. What do you think there's more that we can do there?
Again, seeing what the community and school are looking for. But I think one of the things, so for example, looking at some of our library services, at the moment, if a parent has not returned a library book, then the whole whānau cannot take books out. And so we need to look at some of our existing policies and encouraging these communities to link into the library and see that it's not a scary space. And if you haven't returned your library book, we're not going to banish you at the door. But it's also the fact that we have a technology van. And here we're running services in Fordlands, so free parking, for example. Can we link up our technology van and ensure that that's attending on the reserve while the children and young people are there? There's free Wi-Fi once that van is in and around that space. So again, it's talking to the community, seeing what they want, and sometimes it's about taking our services to them.
Thank you. Ms. Mohi?
Kia ora korua, kia ora Jill. I just want to say off the bat, I absolutely support this report, and given that Te Tato had made a submission in the 2030 vision process, I feel that we must support this report. I noticed on page 16 there's a small paragraph there, kura kaupapa Māori and rural schools are being considered for inclusion. I would love to see that change to are included, and that they are actually brought into phase 1. And I'm just mindful in Mahi Kia Katoa, Ngāti Kura or Sunset, that right next door to Sunset in the same deprivation area is Hurungaterangi Kura Kaupapa Māori. And they could put, being economies of scale and things like that, being right next to each other, they seem to face the same issues, but one's a Kura Kaupapa. I'd like to recommend that they be approached as a pilot school for this process as well. And thirdly, it's not as glamorous as Te Aka Māori and things like that, but a lot of our kura in our schools are moving into STEM programs, so suggesting incorporating the wastewater treatment plant and the water supply plants as well to encourage our rangatahi into engineering and planning and things like that. So, kia ora. That's all for me.
Thank you, Ms Multy. Councillor Stewart.
Madam Chair, thank you, Jill. You have a history of being innovative in terms of gathering all the relevant data together and bringing forward a report that is going to lead the way ahead. And I notice up there that this month you've got 5 key targets, and following on till February next year you've got a couple of key targets. But Madam Chair, in viewing this report, I've always been a sceptic in terms of why should local government be involved in this, but I think with what Ms Mohi said and other speakers have said, with us now getting into our well-being of our community, and I don't think we should bash our heads up against the wall. And whilst Her Majesty, the Mayor said we've been focusing on infrastructure, we've also got a number of projects in line, on stream, that will attend to some of these issues of poverty, deprivation. But the issue that this report raises is access. It's all very well having a wonderful skate park. The kids can't afford a skateboard or a scooter or a bike to go mountain biking or whatever. What's the use of having them? So I think if that is the issue that is addressed, because I believe being vulnerable and being a child exposed to real poverty is not necessarily the barriers to participation in recreation and sport. I also harken back to those families where both parents are forced to work, where the grandparents have now become the caregivers of those children. Under 9, you mentioned 0 to 9, and 0 to 9 is when they need the most assistance, because they're at 9 or 10 they're going on to intermediate school, but prior to that they need to be dropped off, picked up, etc., etc. But preschool, the other issue that I don't think is really addressed in here is the access to play centres and childcare centres and things like that. A lot of these kids that are vulnerable that you talk about in the report do not get access. Kura kaupapa, bilingual centres, etc., at the early childhood centre end. So I just wondered where, in between November and February, you'll work not only with the school community but with our community to see whether there are any gaps there. I'm happy with the gaps that you found and that you're intending to meet, but I think there's more work to be done, and I'd wonder what your view was. I mean, I think this is a lot bigger than what the can of worms we've opened today in terms of advocating strongly for our community. The other thing is, I just wondered how receptive have the partnership idea with other government agencies been in terms of doing exactly what you said, Madam Chair, of the co-designing of programs. I wondered how receptive they've been. So there's a number of comments here that I'd like you to respond to, if you could. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I've got the harder question there, Charles. I think the question about the early access to, it starts to get out of the scope we've set ourselves. But I think one of the things that has been created by this discussion we've started is there that opportunity to bring the right people together to have that wider community discussion. And I think some of the groups that have already met will start wanting to talk into the other spheres. So we've started off in one place talking about some pilot schools and those access issues for students, but I don't expect this to be a conversation to end there. We may be in a supporting role if MSD or Ministry of Education or someone else takes up the baton to start talking about the other parts of what you started to describe, and we'll keep ourselves informed in that. But at this stage we're staying reasonably narrow in what we're looking to achieve. But I think the issue you've raised is it just goes straight back to the number of children in poverty and deprivation that need to be considered for our community, and it's not just one group, it's a whole community issue. So I think we've got to keep that conversation going wide. The other bit too, and Jill might be able to add to this, is I think one of the neat opportunities that we've started to develop is if we co-design and work with the wider school community about the needs and the barriers, then we're actually helping a lot of those funders, whether they're corporates or philanthropics or other agencies who want to help but often don't quite know how to help, and the facilitation we're trying to create is to bring those two things together. We're very lucky as a community that there's some wonderful programs that are currently in place, and we have to see those, they fit into this equation as well. And the most obvious one is something like the Ngāti Whakaoi Education Endowment Trust and the transport for the museums. Transport's central to this challenge, and it is critical whether we take the technology to the children or we somehow get that vice versa. So we've got some willing partners who are already putting their piece of the puzzle together. Now, if we work successfully with the school community, we can bring in a whole lot more and just really leverage off that. I don't know if you can, anything else, Jill?
I guess, to be frank, this is us trying to start somewhere. And the reality is that, and I may be off by a percentage, but with regards to early childhood education, and this is in the Māori or mainstream curriculum, Rotorua has like a 96 or 95% participation rate. So actually, as a community, we have very good participation in early childhood. We are working with the Forelands Community Association, and when we're looking at the community reinvigoration work, then this potentially sits just beside it. And keeping in mind then when you're working with the 0 to 4 or 5-year-olds, that it really is about whānau. Where we're working with that primary school age bracket, we're going through the school, because in some cases we really can't change what's going on at home, but we're going to try and make a difference where we can. When we're talking about the under school age, so 0 to 5, again, it's about involving the parents as much as possible, and so we need to work with the community to navigate through that.
Thank you, Jill. Mr. Berryman-Kemp, Councillor Hunt, and then Councillor Tapsell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. And Sunset Primary School, fantastic to see the support of you here today, bringing not one but two principals. Awesome. I have one question and one comment. Certainly fully took all the application, and two, would like to reiterate Councillor Raukawa-Tait's point. Fantastic to see this come to the table here, because this is about building the community that we live in. My comment is whether or not you've looked into some of the research around this in terms of wider building community stuff. One thing that springs to mind is Te Pū Waitanga o ngā whānau, which is markers of flourishing whānau from Te Kani Kingi down at Massey University. Because certainly one of the things that he outlined, community interaction is actually a marker of flourishing families. Those families who are connected with their community and participate in the community flourish. Those who don't languish. So I think there's components of that sort of research that can be put into this. My question is, and I think there's a bit of a theme that goes through with this, fantastic to see it's a start. We all know that there needs to be a start, and certainly the pragmatic side of me understands that you need to go where the need is the greatest. What are the thoughts further down the line of being able to extend the program out for those whānau or tāmariki in high deprivation whānau, but who live or attend low deprivation schools, if you understand what I mean? Because again, the wonderful thing about Rotorua is that we don't have as strong a geographic bias in terms of where people live. So it's quite possible for those who are not attending some of these schools but are in high need. So my question is, and I realise it's an aspirational future one, what are the thoughts to being to tailor the program to more a individual basis rather than a school basis?
At this point, I think all we can say is we need to learn through our evaluation and see what's working. And by focusing on the high need communities, low deprivation school, low decile schools, we're able to work with a concentrated area. And so that's why we're focusing that way. But again, it will be through our evaluation methods that we're able to learn and grow and adapt and change to ensure that we're making an impact. Again, Sunset is the inaugural partner, but Kuraupapa Māori and some other schools within that cohort are definitely where we want to be going. And also, I guess that bridge for children coming from primary school into intermediate, that if we need to see what the community is telling us, but if they were to turn around and say you have better impact when you're able to follow that child, because once they turn 9 or 10, they're out, then we need to listen to that, and then our program may need to look at how we follow the children rather than encompassing as many children as possible. So we'll see what we learn, and we'll adapt.
Madam Chair, I'd just add to that too. I think one of the opportunities we have here, and it's an important challenge, is us putting our hand up as a local council to take that leadership, and for us then to start involving those government departments that often have more information about the status of families than we do. So that will be one of the opportunities we need to explore going forward. So yes, we've taken a geographical view at this stage, but actually there's an opportunity to say, do we universally apply that in the future, or is it more targeted to those with specific needs? But that's something for the evaluation and those conversations wider than just the community, but also into government departments for us to take forward.
Thank you. Don't forget also that we're not just talking about government departments. There's a very successful and thriving NGO sector that often gets their foot in the door before anybody else. Sorry, Councillor Hunt and then Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Jill, for a great report, and I'm really pleased that of the well-beings that we're now putting some focus and equal weighting to the social aspects in our community. Obviously, they are all equal, but our focus hasn't been on this area, and now it is. My questions are really around, of the 4,000 odd students, how many are in this catchment of Sunset Primary, and by extrapolation, how big is that sort of family grouping? And also issues around, and I think of Children's Day, Matariki, I think of our creative precinct where we're having activities and school holiday programs, and I know that generally school holiday programs are good because they're off-site of the school, so it's a different environment. They sell out quickly. They're usually by those who can afford to, they know they're on, and all of those things. So how will you navigate making sure that these children have equal access to getting in and knowing about those things that are happening in our community, and again making them feel welcome and a part of our community as opposed to apart from. And tied into that is the management of volunteer workers. Now, how did HUT navigate getting volunteers capacity built in the community? Because obviously we're hearing there are very few there at the moment, which is why, you know, the free school swimming isn't happening. And people coming in is great from a mentoring point of view, but there's also got to be that balance that the community then takes the ownership too. So is there some background to how HUT navigated that? And will that be something that certainly that's the sort of feedback on how this fundamentally changes the feeling not only for the children in that community, but for the parents and the other people who live in the community that don't have children. So the other residents and the general feeling of the changes that I think Eugene spoke about.
Those were a lot of questions, Karen. So with regards to the number of children in that community, so from 0 to 9, there's just under 400, and that's from the 2013 census. Letting the community know about existing activities and services. For example, Children's Day has free transport, but a lot of the time these communities are in isolation, so they don't even know it's on. So that communication is going to be definitely a big part of the project. With regards to school holiday programs, the reality is that if a parent is on a benefit, then there is no support for a child to access school holiday programs because OSCAR funding is only for working parents. So again, it's around how we model our support and provide support for the most vulnerable children. With regards to your question around Hut City, they dedicated their probably 4 staff to working around their equity model. So they had staff dedicated to their funding and totally changing their funding policy and ensuring that their funds only went to services that were making a difference to Tamariki, Rangatahi, and Kuia Kamatwa. They really had people that were change makers, but also had a connection to the communities that they were working in, so they had an in. And so they had dedicated staff working with the volunteers, but they also, with that KPMG agreement, they're providing quite a number of staff, but their commitment is for 10 years into this program. So when it comes to that private partnership arrangement, council has those organizations. We work with the private sector that the communities don't even know about. So again, it's about putting that challenge, that widow forward.
No, I'm going to move on with some other Councillor Tapsell and then Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, JP and Jill. And first of all, Jill, I'd just like to thank you for the massive contribution that you have actually given to our community. She's worked very humbly and quietly behind the scenes, but she's actually been improving outcomes for young people in our community for over 10 years now, when she first started as a youth projects officer and now continuing to benefit the wider community. So first of all, thank you, Jill, and it's very exciting to have this project here. I strongly believe that people are our greatest asset. And I believe that children in Rotorua should never have to doubt that they are valuable and deserving of every chance and opportunity to participate in community activities. So I wholeheartedly support this project as a pilot to see how we can better improve access and ensure that all children have rights to access community facilities. The questions that I did have was just on the budget, on how we can support this to be sustainable, long-term, and also just on council strategy and how it fits into the wider picture of what we do in council. Because for those that may be thinking this is a little bit outside of council scope, it's absolutely not. This is ensuring that the people that are most vulnerable in our community are able to access those services. So just those 2 questions. On the budget, how do we ensure that that could be sustainable long term? And then where does this fit into council's wider strategy? And I'm thinking about the community funding programs that we have, which is $400,000 annually, and also the partnership programs. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'll start off on this one, and thank you very much for acknowledging Jill's work. I think it's very important that staff do get recognised for some of the work they're doing, so thank you very much for acknowledging Jill's efforts there. We're proposing to pretty much dedicate Jill as within her staff time within council to facilitating this project. So you can see here we've mapped out a timeline for the next year. So Jill will be central to that facilitation and trying to work not only with the school on that co-design, but also to make sure we are lining up the partners around it and in support of it as well. And I think that's the key part of the financial sustainability and the funding going forward. Jill has highlighted some of the examples we're seeing in other parts of the country, a strong corporate support for the Hut City. We're potentially not quite as able to extract that corporate support as something like Hut City down in Wellington. But what we are very rich in is the not-for-profits and some of the other philanthropic trusts that operate within our community. And some have an exceptional focus on ensuring good educational programs are supported. And I mentioned Ngāti Whakaui's Education Endowment Trust. And obviously Rotorua Trust as well. So we've got a number of philanthropics that are very keen to be central to this discussion. And I think once we've given some opportunities for corporates, there is some significant opportunities for us to partner with them to give some longevity and some funding support to this. Obviously central to this, and we haven't shied away from the comment here about it may take some costs for council within this. We haven't been able to quantify those as yet, but that's part of the work we would want to bring into the annual budget discussions. You know, if we start looking at our policy around access to the aquatic centre, that obviously comes at a cost and lost revenue from that. Equally, if we're looking at library access and library policies, similar sort of things. So there is a number of services that we would have to identify as having cost implications. Now, whether that sits within the funding regime from those external sources or is just seen as the council's community contribution into that, that's a question we need to ask you probably as we start developing this program. So at this stage, I don't have the answer, but that is part of the work we'll be doing over the next 3 to 6 months, and we'll come back to you in that space. But Council, I think what we've seen from other areas is where they've taken up this challenge, there is that community support and that funding support, sometimes quite long term, and that's what we've got to focus on. And then your other question about our grants, it gives us another chance to look seriously about, are we getting the most impact out of the grants we currently provide, and could they or should they be directed to other projects like this? So that is a choice for us to consider moving forward as well.
Thank you. And our final two speakers, Councillor Bentley and then Mrs. Trumper. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pretty much my question with regard to funding and so forth has been answered. So I take it that you're reasonably confident that you'll find interested equity partners out there from the private sector and from various trusts, so that the ongoing cost to council, apart from your wages, of course, is possibly quite minimal. Thank you very much for the work you've done today.
Thank you. I would imagine that we're leveraging off of council's contribution. So what we put in the pot, we would be looking to attract matched funds. We have had conversations with Rotorua Trust. We've had conversations with Bay Trust. There are definitely funders that are looking at this space. But again, if we're working in partnership, then it may not necessarily be council that is applying for funds. It may be the Forelands Community Association or some of our partners that will umbrella some of the work that we're looking to see happen. There's probably a variety of ways of running a program such as this. And again, it's putting that challenge down to some of our government partners that have funding for such services, but they may not necessarily be delivering it in such way.
Thank you. Mrs. Trumper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a member of the People portfolio, I'm going to say this finally. We've stopped talking about something and we've actually got something on the table. Just a couple of things that I'd like to say is about the recommendation up there. I'd actually like to pick up on a point that Councillor Tatzel has mentioned, and that it's actually implementing a pilot child equity program, because that would then provide better communication to the community that we are actually piloting a program and that we're actually going to look at the wider implications at a later date, so that we actually acknowledge that. Sorry, I digress, but the communication to the public is absolutely going to be crucial, is how we sell this to the community, because I think what we need to really focus on the positive aspect rather than the budgeting costs. Sorry, I digress here. And then a community approach for volunteers. Now, having been on many organisations, volunteers are very difficult to find. And I just wondered whether some of the high schools had been approached for a senior buddy kind of mentor program. You know, some of the students from Toi Ohomai, for some of the education programs that they have there, whether they are actually able to participate. I know there's obviously criteria around vetting and what have you, but you know, that could be a good base to look for. Going back to a point that Mrs. Mohi made was around the schools in Kurukopapa and rural. You know, and you mentioned 400 at Sunset are within that demographic. I really would like to see the program extended, especially more so for the ones that actually have transport difficulty. And obviously it won't take too much of a genius to know that I'd be actually talking about Kaingoroa, Mamaku, you know, and I know that there is a Tukura Kaupapa school out Rotorua. You know, that these are other areas that we need to be looking at. And pretty much I know they weren't questions, they were comments. But yeah, no, well done. And I think let's get going.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Worship, councillors, for the discussion this morning. This is, for me, one of the saddest things to read in your report was that 3 out of every 5 young people living in high deprivation stay there for life. I mean, that is a sad indictment on New Zealand society. The other thing that saddens me terribly is that the majority of the children right now, 0 to 9 years of age, are Māori. So that's an issue for Māori leadership to address as well. And I think that they have to look very, very, very carefully into the future and to say, because what does that actually mean for the social and economic well-being of Māori families in the future when these young people become parents of their, parents themselves? So this is a very, very good start. Children do not live in deprivation on their own. They're living in a home where the whānau lives in deprivation, where everybody lives in deprivation, where the isolation is constant, where there is, often for many of them, there is a lack of hope. Not only a lack of needs to be covered, but there's actually a lack of hope descends on the family. So I think this is very good. I think I don't believe you will need to wait all that long to see the difference that something like this could make for the families. I know we always tend to look at long term because it's hard mahi. We all know that trying to lift people out of deprivation is hard mahi. But I think we should be able to see the difference that it's made, particularly for the children within a very short time. I want to thank Sunset in particular for rising to the occasion, for picking up the challenge for this, and I do wish you, and I know the Mayor and fellow councillors and everyone on this committee, we wish you every success for the program, and we will do what we can to assist as well. Thank you for the discussion this morning. Thank you, kia ora, councillors. Thank you. Oh yes, now we have to put it, don't we? Councillor Gould has moved, Councillor Stewart has seconded, that the committee recommends to Council that it approve implementing a pilot child equity program aimed at improving equitable outcomes for children in partnership with stakeholders and funders. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, Thank you. Carried unanimously. Kia ora and thank you. Now, on page 25. So, could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, Earthquake-Prone Building Identification Process Update and Decision on Priority Routes, that report be received. Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Camp. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, Morena Korua. Good morning, Henry. Good morning. That's right. Yes, Henry. Yes.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, and kia ora koutou councillors and board members. And look, I'll just very quickly introduce on my right, probably doesn't need a lot of introduction for a number of you, but Daryl Holder, who's the leader of our building services team, and certainly I think one of the probably most respected and leading practitioners of the art across the country, so we're lucky to have him here. So really what Daryl will do is take you through the paper briefly, which really has two purposes. First is just to kind of refresh your memories in terms of the change which has happened in terms of the Building Act and the process around earthquake-prone buildings, which again is a subject which I know a lot of you know a bit about, but often want to know more about, and also to put a decision to you which is required under the Building Act in terms of priority routes. So possibly without prejudging the early discussion, maybe about the background, maybe more significant actually than the decision, which is a relatively technical one. But I'll hand over to Daryl.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Yes, as Henry's alluded, I'm going to just give it a bit of a background on what has gone before us in terms of the earthquake-prone building legislation and what's currently before us. So effectively, when the Building Act was introduced in 2004, it made it mandatory for all councils to introduce a earthquake-prone building policy. It was a pretty blunt instrument, so the guidance we received at the time from government was that all buildings prior to 1976 had to be assessed as potentially earthquake-prone, and that put quite a burden on the building owners, the councils, to try and identify those things. But the other thing that it did was it made those processes up to the individual councils to adopt policies, and we ended up with a myriad of different outcomes, I guess. Rotorua adopted a proactive policy at the time. Others were passive in things. So what happened in Rotorua, we identified potentially 1,600 buildings that required earthquake assessments, and that required an assessment by a structural engineer. So we went to the building owners, asked them to provide this, but the way that the legislation worked, there was no compulsion for those people to abide by those requirements or those requests, so that everything sort of fell flat, and it was a bit of a gap in the legislation, I suppose. And then, unfortunately, after the tragic events in Christchurch, we've ended up with a Canterbury Royal Commission, Earthquake Commission, who made some recommendations to government, which has resulted in changes to the legislation. So effectively, all councils must now prescribe to the requirements of the Building Act. So they've thrown 3 regions together, of which Rotorua is a medium risk region, which prescribes the timeframes in which now we must do some further investigation and work with owners to have their buildings strengthened. So what that means to us is we've got to do a little bit of rework, but we're in good shape because we've already got a whole lot of that information anyway. So key changes were, yes, 3 different regions. They made it mandatory for some strengthening from different timeframes. So Rotorua, we've got 25 years to strengthen and 10 years to identify. So effectively, over the course of, if we're not identifying someone's building for another 8 or 9 years, they've got another 25 years after that. So it's increased the time frame to do work substantially from what we had under our previous policy, which was the maximum, I think it was 15 years at the time. So there's going to be a lot more relief for building owners under the legislation. they've asked us to define some priority buildings. Priority buildings are those that are either on a priority route or have post-disaster responsibilities or early childhood and the likes of schools. And they've also defined a profile building. So what they've done under the current legislation is they've taken a risk-based approach. So I guess I'll stress to the committee today was that it's not going to identify all earthquake-prone buildings. So what they've done is accepted that some are going to be below the threshold of 33% of new building standard, but they're not going to do anything with those. So what will happen with those is probably the industry and the banks and the insurers and things are going to be the drivers behind the strengthening of those buildings, or subsequently if we get the likes of a change of use when the legislation requires us to consider those things. So at any time we can act on information that was provided to council and deal with those. They've also put in a lot of exemptions, the likes of timber frame buildings that don't rely on any other component of structural stability and things, which will take out a whole heap of buildings. So in summary, in terms of the buildings that we are going to look at, is anything which has got unreinforced masonry, and masonry is brick, stone or blockwork. Any buildings pre-76 that are over 3 or more stories and 12 metres in height, or pre-1935 buildings. So by default, we take out a whole lot of buildings that were of previous interest to us. And in doing that, we've got 10 years to identify those. So what the government's come around and told us unofficially is they don't want us to rush out and do everything at once, because there's not enough engineering capacity in the country to do all this work. So progressively, we're just going to work through the list. We're already dealing with people as required basis, and we haven't been as proactive to date because of what I'm about to explain around the priority routes. We've had to do a whole lot of work before we could actually come to council to ask for this decision. So in terms of one of the other requirements of the Act is we've got to establish whether we have any priority routes. Now, a priority route must have sufficient vehicular or pedestrian traffic to, one, warrant priority, and B, must contain buildings that have got unreinforced masonry. If you think about all the buildings around town, a lot of Rotorua's early building stock was made up of the in situ concrete, with pumice concrete with reinforcing and things in. So we don't have the buildings like sort of Oamaru and things where they're all constructed of stone and brick and things. So by default, what we've done, we've gone through all our existing databases and we've looked at over 200 buildings in the central business district, and we've also had a look at Nongataha in terms of the pedestrian count and things like that. And of all those, we haven't found any information that would suggest that we've got any unreinforced masonry buildings. So therefore, I don't believe we need to make a decision on having a priority route. So a priority route would dictate that building owners would have half the time prescribed in the Act to strengthen or demolish their buildings. So effectively, that's the decision that we want today, is to support the findings that we don't need to set priority routes and that we will default to the 25-year time frame, 10 years to identify and 25 to strengthen their buildings. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Daryl. I think that'll be good news for a lot of our building owners in town. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree with the recommendation, so I'm happy to second Councillor Sturt's motion. But my question, Daryl, is did they, under the Building Act, look at glass-clad buildings? And I think about one whopper in town that's currently being redeveloped that's got external glass cladding on it. And also I recall about a year ago, I think it was, that I was alerted to some loose glass on a veranda in the spine of the CBD that council was quick to act on when it was phoned in. So is glass considered an issue under the Act at all or not?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, look, it's not. Unfortunately, what they have concentrated on, and if you'll all recall the unfortunate images on the TV in Christchurch. It was the unreinforced masonry that fell on the buses and the cars and the pedestrians and things in the CBD. So I think that in terms of, they've looked at a risk profile that's concentrated on actual what's happened rather than what may happen. And in terms of, I guess, like you've alluded to in town, what we've done was we've reacted to a report that we've got loose glass, and we have powers under the Building Act to go and deal with those things on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, Your Worship.
That is, I'm sure, good news for many that got quite anxious about the time frame in the past. What volume of buildings are we looking at now? I know it's not the unreinforced masonry, but what volume of buildings are we looking at in the CBD that are requiring earthquake strengthening?
Through you, Madam Chair, look, we haven't done that
work.
What we've done is we've had to do this chunk of work to actually define whether we've got any unreinforced masonry. So it will be quite a quick thing to go back through there again. We need to chunk all this work. So while it would be great to get it done immediately, what we've got to be conscious of that we don't want to unearth a whole lot of stuff that puts a whole lot of pressure on building owners and the engineers, because unfortunately the way that legislation's written at the moment, you get 12 months to provide a report. You can apply for an extension for a further 12 months, and if you don't provide it, the default is you end up with a earthquake-prone building notice and on the National Register. So we've got to temper our enthusiasm a little bit with it.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I think this is. I was listening from the cheap seats when the previous rules were moved, and I think this is a real improvement on them. So I think that's great. I just have one question. You know, the 33%. I know in Wellington, when they brought in that 33% level, that in actual fact a lot of the strengthening has come through the fact of people wanting to sell their buildings or reinsure with a different company, and although 33% is the legal setting, a lot of insurance companies are demanding much higher strengthening levels. Do you expect that will happen here? And because that has driven a lot of the strengthening in Wellington, I know, over the last several years.
That's probably our experience too. We're seeing that come through, and people who strengthen their buildings, they're trying to get it as high as possible, and then a lot of that is tenant and finance driven. We've also got a ratchet clause in the Building Act that says if you go to change the use of the building, then it must comply as near as reasonably practicable with the structural performance. And that's widely accepted by the engineering fraternity as being around 66%. Our recommendation when talking to people will always be saying, look, try and get it as best you can, it's going to future-proof you. But we're not the drivers. It has been the industry that's been leading that.
Thank you, Mrs. Trumper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's sort of not really around the identification process, but it's really, you mentioned something, Daryl, around post-disaster building use, etc. Has the community halls been investigated, and are they safe for use? Because in the rural community, that is where the sector bases would be set up, so I'm just ensuring that everything has been taken care of out there.
Through you, Madam Chair, look, we haven't had any specific discussions around those things. Most of the things would be around hospitals, police stations and things. I acknowledge that the community welfare buildings will be part of that discussion, because and that's something we've yet to do. So the priority buildings, we've only got 5 years in which to identify them, and they've only got 12 years to come up to speed. But interestingly, a lot of those community halls and things, brands have done research and things, and a lot of them perform very well, and that's why you'll see in some of the exemptions, those types of buildings don't need to be assessed anymore. They will get dragged back in for some form of assessment if they are deemed to be, a community centre required after an emergency.
Councillor Gould.
Yeah, thank you, Daryl, for your report. On page 28, when you got pre-1976 buildings, does that mean buildings built in 1976 exempt from that category, or is it 1975 and backwards which have to be in category B?
Look, that's a good question. So we've effectively 1975, but like any change, and so that was when one of the changes took place in the building standards, but it's like any transition, you often have a couple of years worth of grace either side, or after that where they may have designed it earlier but not submitted for several years. So effectively we're just going to be sticking to pre-76, and then it again will be just relying on further information and time to come if it was any different.
Two further questions. One with category C, pre-1935 buildings. I think you may have to look at Rotorua too, because some of those buildings, one of them may be pretty in that sort of category. And also, are farm sheds counted when there are more than 12 metres in height? You know, where they store the hay and things like that. Would you have to expect that the farmers have to strengthen?
Masonry.
Look, no, the farm buildings and things are written out of the well, it's in the guidance document. It's not prescribed in the Act, but there's guidance around that. Sorry, could I just get you to repeat question 1? Sorry, 2. The one you've mentioned prior to that one.
Your first question, can you remember what it was for Councillor Gall? I must admit it escapes me. Your first one.
Oh, look, they will get picked up in due course.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, councillors. It's been moved and seconded. It's been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Donaldson, that the committee recommends to council that the requirement to set priority routes under section 133AE of the Building Act does not apply in the Rotorua district, as there are no known unreinforced masonry buildings in areas of high pedestrian or vehicle traffic, namely within the Rotorua Central Business District or Nongataha Village. Been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. I'm going to press on until 1 o'clock, and then we'll have a break for lunch. Thank you. Recommendation 3, page 31. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, that the report Alcohol Ban Bylaw Deliberations and Adoption be received? Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. It's been moved by Councillor Bentley, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. I'll put that motion. All those in favour of the Alcohol Ban Bylaw Deliberations and Adoption be received, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. John Paul. Oh, Rosemary. Hello there, Rosemary. Thank you. Good morning, Rosemary.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Carol, is there a presentation? Thank you. Okay, so the matter this morning is around our alcohol ban bylaw. So we have bylaws, and basically they need to be reviewed every 10 years. The drivers for the changes in this bylaw are basically some legislative changes which require us to change the word liquor for alcohol, and some other matters which are identified in the report. The proposed bylaw has been out for consultation. We've had 3 submissions, and we've also had some legal advice on the drafting. So I'm going to take most of the matters as read, and perhaps just move to the key points really around the submissions. So Mr. Stace raised an issue around camper vans and people parked in camper van areas where it's actually in an alcohol ban area, and he was seeking an exemption for that, and I guess our response is that we don't recommend that. We also have the Lakes District Health Board made a submission which supported the proposed bylaw. And we had quite extensive submission from the Alcohol Harm Prevention Officer, New Zealand Police, and evidence presented around alcohol-related offences, supporting the reasons and the areas of the ban. And they actually requested us go further. However, the Local Government Act requires that alcohol ban bylaws be proportionate, and some specific needs for evidence around the need to reduce harm balanced with people's rights and so on. So we don't actually support the suggestion for further ban areas. We also had a legal review undertaken just to make sure that it was all compliant with requirements. And in your track to changes copy of the bylaw, you can actually see the legal comments in there. And they actually recommended that we don't include Part 3, that it wasn't necessary, that was actually replicating other things, which if we included, we would actually have to change the bylaw if they changed. So we recommend that the legal recommendations be accepted. So I'll sort of open for you to consider those submissions.
Thank you. I know there are going to be some questions, so thank you for that, Rosemary. Yes, Mr. Berryman-Kam.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. My only question was regarding Mr. Stace's submission, and I understand the rationale, although to be fair, owning a camper van, somewhat disappointed, but anyway. Are there areas where camper vans will be able to park that will be outside of the alcohol ban if people want to do that?
Yes, I think he's referring to the areas really around the CBD and places like that where people do park. However, they are, there has been evidence of alcohol-related offences in those areas. And although Mr. Stace might be a moderate drinker, if you allow it for one person, then how do you control the people who actually don't behave themselves as well? So there are certainly other places in the district where they can park.
Thank you. Mr. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was one I was going to comment on that. Says you've considered these submissions and that. Is it too late now to review it against something that came out of Mr. Stace's one? It's the 5% who are spoiling it for the 95%. But I've seen some of the people like they're parked down there by the yacht club, and they just put a little table down and they put their little things there, glass of wine. They're not, and I agree with this here, they're not sort of heavy drinkers or anything, it's just moderate. Is it too late for reconsideration or anything?
Yes. The short answer is yes, Mr. Councillor Maxwell. With submissions we had, sorry, I better. Yes, sorry, Rose.
So if I could just add, so the report from the police had fairly extensive data around offending that continues to happen even in alcohol ban areas. So I think that was really fairly strong support, particularly for the CBD areas. I know that for the areas that we looked at some of the reserves, that there have been questions about that before. But again, so the evidence from the police around the level of harm and where actually they've been called to things happening and where Watchdog are called to things happening, or actually our support, those are the reserves that are in the bylaw that have been the cause of problem. I would imagine that if somebody's doing something that's not causing a problem, it wouldn't create any issue. I think it's just so that there is a concentration of offending happening in certain areas, and that's what this bylaw is intended to address.
Ms. Mohi.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Just through you, just support the proposal put through. My only question is just how this is communicated post the decision, particularly in those areas where this will be a brand new sort of way of thinking and being. For example, in Raukawa-Tait, going through the draft bylaws as we've been working through them over the last few months, and I drove through Raukawa-Tait in different areas, and you'll see, it's quite common practice for people to be walking around what they can and whatnot, and it'd be good to see that stop. But that people communicate that this is really communicated well, so they're not learning by the hard hand of the law, rather than, so really just encourage a really good communications practice in accessing local newsletters and such as the one that Councillor Sturt regularly contributes to in Rotorua, and in the other areas, particularly around the reserves, the roads, and the new commercial areas that this is going to be in effect now. that's all from me. Kia ora.
So there aren't actually any new areas in this. So the areas have not changed from the previous bylaw. So this hasn't extended any of the areas at all. It hasn't changed the areas that were previously covered by the bylaw with a different name, just like a liquor control instead of alcohol. So, but I certainly take your point around making sure it's well communicated, that people understand where it happens and what it means for them.
I guess secondary question then. I guess if it's always been in place, the community don't know it because it's, this is not new. It's quite common in many areas to see people waltzing around with open canisters. So communication is still an issue. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Sturt.
Ms. Mohi was talking about, for example, Elliott Park and Western Road is quite a high area where there's a wonderful playground put in by our staff, and quite often you'll see whānau or family groups there with a blanket down, having a couple of wines, etc., etc. But there's nothing up there saying that there's a liquor ban area, and that's the point I think Mrs. Moy was talking about, and that could be replicated right across Ngongataha. So I support the bylaw. Just one other question: the camper van situation. If they open their bottle of wine inside the camper van, but are parked down at the lakefront, we've got no control over that. And normally police only act on complaints, don't they?
Yeah, I don't believe the police go around looking for it. I think it's more this is a tool to help them when there is a problem, to be able to address it. But I think you're right, the things that fly under the radar and don't come to anyone's attention and aren't causing a problem for anyone else are unlikely to be involve the police.
Attend to the signage issue?
I beg your pardon?
Are we going to attend to the signage issue because there's nothing up
I'll need to talk to Nevin's team who actually implement that. Certainly when we have temporary bans put in place, there's certainly signage and lots of advertising around that. But I certainly take your point that people don't realise what's been there for a long time unless there's some advertising around it.
Mrs. Trumper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, the question has been asked, but I just really wanted to just throw out there about camper vans, and I was disappointed to see that they couldn't actually have alcohol. But how are they going to know that they are in an alcohol ban area without a sign? Because I'm sorry I can't find in here, but there was something written in the report, with or without the sign, it is illegal. Well, sadly, we have a lot of tourists in our country that actually don't read or understand English. So I think we need to be really mindful that communicating to everybody is rather than a hard end.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Trumpet. Your Worship, did you want to make a comment?
To make a comment on your comments about responsible camping, there's been a report to government and the minister's responded in a draft tourism strategy that the recommendations on the responsible camping working party will be adopted. That's in draft. That's including when you arrive and pick up a camper van in the country, you'll be given an education about how and where you can go through the country, and Rotorua will respond to that. And as well, there was the Te Aki pledge about looking after the environment, which is about not throwing your cans away. I think you're more concerned about problems that aren't manifestly obvious in our community. There's other tools that we're going to address the concerns that both Councillor Sturt and Maxwell raised. A sign on the side of a road in a reserve isn't an education to a camper van that pulls up. I think there are other ways that education about responsible behaviour is going to be managed through the report to the department and the minister. I know what you're saying, but the Deputy Dave and I met with our regional district police commander. These aren't the top issues that we have reported back to us that we're dealing with in terms of law and order in our community.
Oh, yes, Councillor.
On to that, because that was the question that I asked. But certainly, if there's a sign up on the corner of Western Road and a group of youths under 20 years of age turn up and open up a box of tinnies or whatever, etc., etc., normally a local will say, "Oi, there's a sign up there, you know, put it in your car or whatever." So with no sign there, you've got no to take charge of that issue yourself. So you just go into your car and ring the police. I just find that I'd rather be proactive than reactive.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'm happy to move 2, 3 and 4, but just in response, Selwyn Reserve, I live on the boundary of that, and there's a sign got bolted to my fence for the liquor ban area on it as people drive in, and since that was put in place at the time of the previous liquor ban, before we changed to an alcohol ban, marked improvement or marked reduction in antisocial behaviour in that car park adjacent to the Scout Hall and the tennis club. So that sign does work, but of course we're in a digital age, and I think if we can have it on the Show Me My Rotorua or the Round Town app where the liquor ban areas are, I think that'd be a useful step, but I support the new bylaw.
Thank you. Thank you for the... yes, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you very much, thank you. I mean, you know, we have it's not the camper van, I don't believe it, because I mean, I just live over from the camper van park. It's not the camper van people we've got a problem with, it's New Zealand's drinking culture. It's New Zealand's drinking culture. So, but I always feel rather sad when I look at Rotorua, because it is, as Councillor Maxwell said, 5% is spoiling it for the rest. But of course, what we do is then we take we take the lowest common denominator and say, right, it's a ban on all our reserves and everything. It's like a sledgehammer too. So I just feel it's rather disappointing, because the drinking culture in New Zealand, whether this will help to any great extent, I'm not convinced. But however, as somebody said to me the other day, for a tourist town, we're getting so punitive, particularly in terms of our drinking, alcohol. I mean, admittedly, he's got a vested interest, but nevertheless, you know, they go out of Rotorua for their drinks. So, bit of a shame. Yes, Councillor Hunt, thank you.
I'd like to speak in support of this, because I think it was fairly clear from the number of police call-outs in areas that don't have an alcohol ban, they're in the 2000s, and the areas that there's an alcohol ban in place, then it's in the 400s. So we do know that while we may be punishing the 5%, the other 95% of us benefit from having an alcohol ban area in those parks. It means that our families and our children can play in those reserves without worrying about there being broken glass because someone's had a party there last night. Neighbours can sleep because a whole van load of young people or older people aren't turning up and drinking till all hours. And if we did allow camper vans, then you could paint anything on a van and call it a camper van and load it up with all your friends and go to those areas. And that's really what we're trying to manage. Not the law-abiding tourists and or locals who come here. We're trying to create a safe environment, and this is happening all over the country, and it's a good thing for our community. We're heading in the right direction to address the very issues of the drinking culture that we know plagues our hospitals, plagues our roads, and certainly plagues our communities. So I'm fully in support of it.
That the committee recommends to Council that the attached alcohol ban bylaw 2018, attachment 2, be made in accordance with the Local Government Act 2002. 3, that the committee recommends to Council that the new alcohol ban bylaw 2018 shall come into force and take effect on the 22nd of November 2018. And 4, that the committee recommends to Council that the Public Places Liquor Control bylaw 2009 be revoked on the 22nd of November 2018. It's been moved by Councillor Donaldson and seconded by Mr. Thomas. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. Did you not take part in the discussion, or did you not vote? Is that what you want? Oh, you didn't either. That was the one you didn't. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move to recommendation 4, and hopefully we'll be able to, I'm sure we'll be able to get through this one prior to lunch. Thank you. You're moving 1 and 2. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Oh, actually, I better get the move. Thank you. So, second, Councillor Hunt. It's moved. Seconded. I'll just put the number 1 first at this point in time. That the report temporary liquor ban, NZME Radio Limited, ZM Float Music Festival, Flotilla, 2019. That be received. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Hunt. I'll put that motion. All those in favour that the report be received, please say aye. Contrary. Thank you. Thank you. Hello there. Good morning, Nevin. Or good afternoon, Nevin. Do you have a question? Sorry, do you have a question first? Oh, thank you.
Councillor Hunt is seconded, but Nevin, I just wondered, what was the purpose of having the liquor ban right along the road? Is that to stop people with cans walking, you know, that sort of thing, and throwing them at cars or whatever? I mean, I just wondered what the purpose of that was, because there's not going to be any sale of liquor at that venue on that particular period at all, is there? So people can't bring liquor to the venue. Can you just clarify that for me, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Yes, the area right along in front of the Top 10 Holiday Park caused some issues for the organisers last year.
Oh, okay.
And the issue is that while the access to the boat ramp and the reserve is controlled by their security coming in, people could come and park in that, drink and take their alcohol along the waterfront. And so this is a way of controlling that.
Okay. Understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nevin. You'd like to talk to the report or just take it as read?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think take it as read, please, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
I'd just really like to speak in support of this. I think that it's incredibly proactive of NZME, who are a national company, to recognise that they want to host a family event, and that due to issues last year and the rubbish and other problems, that they have proactively sought to create this as a family-friendly environment, and I think they're to be commended for that. And I hope that we'll see, and I know we will see, more family-friendly events coming through that request these specific liquor bans in council areas that are not previously covered, for all those reasons of safety for the community. So I think it's a great thing.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. It's a shame we can't get to the stage where a family-friendly event actually does allow for good alcohol. Yeah, responsible alcohol. I just find it unbelievable. It is a music festival. So, you know, anyway, let's, yes, no, Councillor Tapsell, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and likewise I also share the disappointment of it, actually, that we aren't allowed to do that, because there's a number of young people within this community that fall under my age group, 18 plus, that actually have the legal right to be able to drink alcohol. Whilst there is, of course, limitations to it when we're surrounded by family, the people that were actually there enjoying a beverage, they loved it. And when they see this came out, and of course, because they don't necessarily read council reports all the time, it spread like wildfire. I'm getting messages on Facebook going, what's going on? So I understand it has come from NZME. I understand that there was issues from the Top 10 Holiday Park. Absolutely do support having safe events, but I just have to say that when we do things like this, it's no wonder that there's not very many events that actually cater for that 18 to 30-year-old group that want to be here, and that's why they always go over to the Mount, and that's why they always go over to Taupo and Ohakuni, and we're yet to establish events here in Rotorua that do cater for that. So while NZME, they're clearly saying this will be a family event, I do hope that we can take it into consideration that there is a group of our community that would like to be able to enjoy a beverage at an event in Rotorua.
Yes, well, it's becoming fewer and fewer. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Councillor Tapsell may have mentioned it, and I agree with the sentiment of you both on that issue. But the reason Rotorua secured this event was because the kaitiaki of the lake in Taupo said not coming back because of liquor containers that were turfed off boats into the lake at the event. That's why it came here. So NZME are being smart and protecting their event. Yeah.
Thank you. So, yes, Ms. Mohi?
Kia ora tātou. Just one comment really. You know, earlier we were talking about the child wellbeing process, one of the first reports up, and it's kind of ironic. You know, this is a big part of why we have these lower, you know, these symptomatic issues in our community. These are just symptoms of other things going on in our community. So I think we get that stuff right, we start getting these things right, and we can all behave like grown-ups and when we go out. So yeah, they're all intertwined, all these kaupapa. So just wanted to, you know,
Thank you.
Our kids right, and these things will come right. Kia ora.
Thank you. Well, it's been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Hunt, that the number 2, that the committee recommends to Council that in terms of the provisions of Clause 8B of the Rotorua District Council Public Places Liquor Control Bylaw 2009, Council resolve that the following area be defined on the attached map, which is attachment 3, shall be a specified public place for the period 8 a.m. Saturday the 16th of February 2019 to 10 p.m. Saturday the 16th of February 2019. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. And I'm just going to, if you don't mind, I will take recommendation number 5. It's the review of the prostitution bylaw 2009, and I don't believe it's going to take long, so that we can then go later on after lunch into the public excluded. So thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, review of prostitution bylaw 2009, that report be received. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Kemp. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried.
I volunteered to be chairman of this committee. I was last time. I've got a bit of history with the prostitution bylaw 2009, and quite happy to volunteer to make sure this review is undertaken. It was myself and Councillor Weber, who were the two council representatives who oversaw the initial installation of the prostitution bylaw, and I'm more than happy to help with this situation again.
Yes, thank you for your offer. I think the review has been undertaken, so yes.
Doubt.
Yes.
Disappointed.
Thank you, Rosemary. Is there anything you'd like to add to it? Thank you.
Thank you again. I get all the interesting things today. So this is just, again, a routine bylaw review. It's come up for its regular review. There are no changes being proposed to it. Effectively, the Prostitution Reform Act 2003 informs what we can and can't make a bylaw about. The purpose of that act is to decriminalise prostitution, and it's really around the health and safety aspects of managing that well. So our bylaw prohibits the establishment of brothels outside of the CBD or within 100 metres of a sensitive site, regulates signage, advertising commercial sexual premises. There are no changes to the bylaw. Just to clarify that small owner-operated businesses in the suburbs are not counted as brothels, so as these bigger setups with more workers are classed as brothels. We've talked to some early stakeholders to start with, including the Prostitutes Collective and the Bay of Plenty. They raised 2 issues, one which is again around defining the small owner-operated businesses, and one which is around the fact that we prohibit soliciting and touting in a public place. In intention and practice is that the bylaw is not intended to include the subs as a brothel, and we have previous legal advice from when this was first set up, which supports clause 4.1. So basically we're proposing that the bylaw will go out for public consultation basically until the end of January, and then you'll get submissions and hold hearings on that.
Councillor Stewart, you might yet get your opportunity.
Yeah, being somewhat of an expert on this now, one of the feedbacks during the last consultation period was a very strong drive from the community, and we included section 4, the soliciting and touting clauses within the bylaw, which is on page 132, which quite specifically states no person may in any public place invite or request any person to enter a brothel or other commercial sex premises or to engage in prostitution. And this is where other TLAs, by not including that provision, have had huge problems. Christchurch in particular, I think Masterton's another one. So, Madam Chair, just one question of you, Rosemary, after highlighting that. If we do get submissions, what's the process of hearing those submissions?
So, like other bylaws, a bit like the alcohol one today, is that you will have submissions and there will be a hearing held for you to deliberate on those submissions. Yeah. There's certainly been a lot of case law around how councils can or can't use their bylaws to control these activities. Yes.
Thank you, Rosemary. Well, I'm pleased to hear that we're not banning sex, so that's good. That's going to remain. Look, thank you very much. So we've got 2 and 3. Would someone like to? Yes, cause a move for a thank you. And could I have a thank you, Mr. Thomas? Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded. Number 2, that consideration has been given to the requirements of the Prostitution Reform Act 2003 and the Local Government Act 2002 as set out in this report, and following a review of the Prostitution Bylaw 2009, it is proposed to make a minor correction to clause 2.3. And 3, that the attached statement of proposal, attachment 4, and amended Prostitution Bylaw 2009 be approved for special consultation, and that Council hear and deliberate on any public submissions made. Moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Mr. Thomas. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Could I please have a mover and a seconder that we go into to exclude the public, please? Oh, thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. And the reasons we're going in to receive a presentation on the preferred tenderer for wastewater, and the reasons given. Oh, sorry, to adopt a confidential minutes of the previous meeting as well. So, thank you. So, do we have a mover and did you say? Oh, thank you, Councillor, Mrs. Trumper and Councillor Maxwell. So we'll continue the committee move into public excluded session. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. So we're going to take